That's good.
All right.
Sure.
Just framing up.
So I'll just give these up so I can see properly.
Okay.
Great.
I'm ready.
All right. So keeping in mind this film is being made for an uninitiated American audience, could you briefly explain what your new party is and what its policies are, and why you feel it's important for New Zealand?
Yes, my party is going to be a party which is based on Judeo-Christian values. And we'll do that by actually putting those values into our party's constitution. And the vision is that it will be a long-term party which is based on those values. I like to explain to people this way, that in New Zealand today, there's kind of like a values anarchy. Relativism is very much apparent in our culture. So what's right for you is right for you, and what's right for me is right for me. By contrast, the Judeo-Christian tradition actually says, no, we can actually determine objective truth. And that truth holds for all cultures, for all nations, for all races, for all languages. So we want to build on that long tradition, 3,500 year long tradition, as the basis on which we will then develop our party's policies right across the whole spectrum, health, education, defence, tax, all of those major policy areas.
How does this differ from United Future?
Well, United Future was a party that had a number of Christians in it following the 2002 elections, and I was elected into Parliament in 2002 as part of the United Future Party. So it was made up of quite a number of Christians. We had a caucus of 8, and 7 of us were Christians. After the 2005 elections, we got down to just 3 members of Parliament, and the leader of the party started to take the party in a direction. He did not come from a Christian-based party, as some of the rest of us did. Started to lead the party in a way which, in my view, started to really conflict with those basic Judeo-Christian values. Notably, one of the bills we had here was around the issue of whether or not you should be able to smack your children. I think Americans might call it spanking. We call it smacking, which is the use of a hand to discipline a child, basically to correct and to train that child. And that was a bill which was opposed by 80% of New Zealanders. We've now made that a crime in New Zealand. So if you smack your child now, you can go to jail, which is, I think, a crazy notion and lacks common sense entirely. The leader of the party was intent on voting and supporting that bill, whereas our party membership and myself and my other colleague in the caucus wanted to vote against the bill and oppose it in every way, including a citizen-initiated referendum on the whole issue. So we ended up in a real conflict, and I felt the only honourable thing for me to do was to leave the party. But what it did show me was that it's necessary not just to, as an individual, to have an adherence to Judeo-Christian values, but to actually have a party which was committed to those values as its basic policy positioning.
What are your personal religious beliefs?
I'm a Catholic. I became a Catholic about 35 years ago. Prior to that, I was brought up in a Pentecostal family, so my background is very much one which puts me in touch with what we call the wider body of Christ, people from the whole spectrum of denominations. And the co-leader of my new party is from an evangelical background, so we're a party which is actually co-led by a Catholic and a Protestant. And I think that's very important because where Christian parties have been very successful, and there are currently 14 Christian-based parties that are in part of the parliamentary or part of the democratic mainstream in European countries. There's a couple in South America, Chile and Mexico, a couple in Asia, the Philippines and Indonesia. But one of the great strengths there, of course, the broader you can make that party, the better. So if it's comprising both Catholics and Protestants, then it's more likely to have electoral success.
So, how much influence would you say social conservatives have in New Zealand?
I think there's a very real constituency here for a party based on Judeo-Christian values. There was a proper scientific poll done in late July of this year by a newspaper called the Sunday Star Times, which indicated that 15% of New Zealand voters say that they are likely to vote for a party based on Christian values. 6% said they will certainly vote for such a party. I don't like to see Judeo-Christian values as liberal or conservative in terms of that kind of political analysis. Because, for example, our party will have a strong commitment to social justice, which means looking after the poor, the needy, the disadvantaged, and so on and so forth. Making sure that workers have proper rights, which you could say is a left-wing policy position. But at the same time, as I've mentioned, we are opposed to making smacking illegal. We're opposed to the dreadful reform of prostitution that we've had in this country, which actually makes prostitution just like any other job now here, legally. It's completely legalised, including brothel keeping. So from my point of view, those values, although they might be divided up politically as between left and right, for me the common point is they're Judeo-Christian values, and we want to have policy which holistically expresses those values.
So you mentioned you mentioned international parties. Is it very similar to, say, the only one I'm afraid I'm familiar with is the German CDU, Christian Democratic Union?
Yes, correct. Well, I don't know in great depth that party's constitution, but what I do know is that it was founded in 1948 when the modern German Republic was being founded after the Second World War, etc. And it came about because of a marriage between a Catholic-based party and a Protestant-based party. So that's why I think it's been so successful as part of the German MMP environment, that, as I mentioned earlier, it's got that very broad base. The same is true with other parties in some of the Scandinavian countries and so on. Then you have parties, of course, in countries like Italy or the Philippines, which are predominantly Catholic, where it's a bit different. So I think for a party based on Judeo-Christian values to be successful, as long as you've got that broad base, and they actually have an international affiliation of Christian-based parties around the world. So I think in MMP jurisdictions, particularly in countries which have got a majority of people, where Christianity is a majority religion. In New Zealand's case, we only have a very, very small Jewish community, but those parties under MMP are successful.
You mentioned in the poll that 6% would definitely vote for a party based on Judeo-Christian values, but the threshold for MMP is 5% if you don't win an electorate seat.
Correct.
Are you worried about possibly splitting that 6% of the voters with United Future?
To some extent that'll happen, yes, and also there is another Christian party on the block too now, very recently announced. I think that they will not have the same broad basis of support of the party that I'm building with my co-leader Larry Baldock. Also, we will, between now and the election 2008, explore possibilities for actually trying to capture a seat as well, because as you correctly say, in the New Zealand system, if you get at least one electorate seat, then that puts you into Parliament for the number of MPs which you get in what's called your party vote. New Zealanders have got 2 votes, one for the electorate candidate and one for the party. So, so we'll be content to explore that as well. But even so, with the upside being as high as 15%, I'm personally very confident that if we have to get over the 5% threshold, we can achieve that.
Let's see. In America, social conservatism is widely seen as tied to economic conservatism, and you mentioned that you had a number of policies that would be seen as, to social justice, part of the left. Would you say that social conservatives tend to be economic conservatives as well in New Zealand, or is that just an American phenomenon?
I think it's more of an American phenomena, and of course in America there would be quite a number of Christians, Catholics in particular, I think, have traditionally voted for the Democrats rather than Republicans. I think in New Zealand our political situation is that Americans say to me we don't actually have a right-wing party in this country, because even the National Party, which is the opposition to Labour at the moment, is kind of almost Labour light, our whole history going right back to the 1930s, when New Zealand led the world in developing a welfare state and so forth, means that there are just some sort of givens in New Zealand society. And interesting enough, back in the 1930s, the person who brought it in, Michael Joseph Savage, said at the time, this is applied Christianity. And it seems to me to be absolutely fundamental to the Judeo-Christian value that we have a responsibility to look after each other and to create a society which is based on solidarity. So we don't have the same, we're a country that doesn't have that same very, what I'd call from my point of view, fairly hard separation between economic conservatism and economic liberalism versus the moral issues. That's pretty much common ground for most political parties in New Zealand, that we will have a strong commitment to social justice.
Do you think that having religious parties has taken the pressure off of National and Labour to appeal to the religious, or has it not?
Well, so far in New Zealand, the religious political situation has not been strong. United Future, as we mentioned earlier, got into Parliament in 2002, and I was one of the MPs elected. But not on the basis necessarily that it was a Christian values party, and that was it was really a liberal party which had quite a number of individual Christians within it, which is a slightly different basis. But for me, became an untenable position, because when they drifted away from what the majority of Christians in New Zealand would view as being their value position, they started to lose support, and we had members resigning and so forth, which led to not only myself resigning, but half the board virtually of United Future also at that stage resigned with me. So that's why I think in a way the jury's still out in New Zealand as to how successful a party which is deliberately based on that Judeo-Christian tradition can be. I'm very confident. The vast majority of New Zealanders, even people who don't go to church, even people who belong to other faiths, say to me, look, we're going to support your party because the values that you represent are also my values. So the constituency for my party, I believe, in New Zealand is so big that if we get it right over time, and it might take, a decade to get there, we could become a major player in this country, I believe.
So what was your position with United Future back in 2005?
In 2005, I was re-elected to Parliament. I was what's called the party whip, and I was also the party's spokesman on finance and revenue, on the environment, on outdoor recreation, on transport and energy. I mean, only three of us had a very, very wide range of portfolios. My background is an interesting one. I spent 18 years of my life working in business. I held a senior position as the Chief Financial Officer of a very large multinational company in New Zealand. And then I worked for 18 years basically for the church, for the Catholic Archdiocese of Wellington, again as the financial administrator. So my background is economics and finance.
I did notice the picture of, I believe that's you with the Pope John Paul II?
Yes, Pope John Paul II came to New Zealand in 1986, and I was part of the organising committee for that wonderful papal visit.
Now, some people might assume that the third person on United Future's 2005 list would have gotten your seat when you left the party. And I'm just wondering why it doesn't work like that, why the system works the way it does.
Well, that's actually quite a controversial point in New Zealand, that when I resigned from United Future, I became an independent member of Parliament. And some were saying that by leaving the party, I should also morally leave Parliament. That certainly doesn't apply to my position at all, because 80% of the people who voted for United Future in 2005 were Christians. And they were the very people that put me into Parliament, were the people that were saying that they felt betrayed by Peter Dunne and the decisions he was taking in terms of the direction of that party, which was becoming increasingly antagonistic towards the Christian viewpoint. So I actually just simply kept faith with the people that put me in the first place, so I have no qualms at all morally about continuing on in Parliament. And under the rules which Parliament operates in New Zealand, I'm permitted to do that.
Okay. What's the greatest challenge that your new party faces in 2008?
I think just getting enough votes to see ourselves back here in Parliament. That's our challenge. We're working night and day to really crisscross the country, to get in front of as many audiences as we can, to use all publicity opportunities we can to get our message out there. And when I get in front of audiences, people respond very warmly, as they do, you know, just in normal life when I'm going about at airports and in taxi cabs and so forth. A lot of people say to me, look, we really wish you well, we need a party like yours in New Zealand. So at this point in time, that's our great challenge, just to make sure we've got the candidates, the party structure in place, and to get our message out there so that we can actually be successful next year in next year's elections.
Where have you been campaigning so far?
The length and breadth of the country. New Zealand's quite a long, skinny country. It's about 1,100 miles long. So I've done a lot of flying, and I've been virtually right through the country, north, south, east and west.
Any particular stories that come to mind that really brightened your day when you were out traveling?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I think that many experiences have been very, very good. One very, very happy coincidence was that I resigned from United Future in May, and in July we had the release in New Zealand of the movie Amazing Grace, featuring the life of William Wilberforce, who, one of the greatest politicians in history, was responsible for the abolition of slavery, or the abolition of the slave trade in 1807. And lots of people around New Zealand were going to watch that movie and really became very enthusiastic about the potential to take Judeo-Christian values into the political process and to really affect positive change for the nation. So that's been a very, very happy coincidence, and has actually been quite a superb help to a new party in terms of people saying, "Hey, we know what you're talking about. We know what the potential of your party could be, because we've just seen this wonderful movie about William Wilberforce." So that's been fabulous.
Okay. And 15 years on, I know it's only been 14, but by the time the movie comes out, it'll be 15. 15 years on, do you think MMP is working?
I do, very much so. I became a convert to MMP when I lived in London back in the 1970s, and got to understand the way the MMP works in countries like Germany and other MMP jurisdictions within Europe. And I like it. I think that it's more representative, and I think even the opponents of MMP, now that we've got it in New Zealand, say it is more representative. We have a greater spread of parties. If you think of an electorate or any nation made up of different interest groups with different views, different values, different political positioning, just to have them sort of all amalgamated into just the two big parties, so it's just a first past the post two-party contest, I think actually in a way means that more and more people feel disenfranchised. They say there's actually nobody out there. I'm only given two choices. I'd like 3, 4, 5 choices. I'd like a party that actually specifically was there to represent my interests in the Parliament. So I think that's the big advantage of MMP. As you know, we now have a party here for the Maori, the indigenous people have got their own party. They've been successful. We have the Green Party, who looks after all of the issues from recycling bottles to organic farming to big environmental issues like climate change. And there's my party, as I was saying, coming from a value base on the Judeo-Christian tradition. None of us would probably actually be here in Parliament if it weren't for MMP. So it's provided us with an opportunity to, I believe, make our democracy more representative. I think it encourages people to get more engaged in the political process. They feel they can achieve things through this process which they couldn't achieve through the first past the post process. And I think from the point of view of our society, it's great. We under the old first past the post system, when the government changed, society changed with it, sometimes very rapidly, moving from a left position to a right position, and sometimes with a lot of social damage. I think under MMP, change is more incremental, and so I've become a real fan for it.
Do you think it will work in the United States?
I see no reason why not. I have family living in the United States, and one of the things I've observed there is people opting out of the political process. I think the voter turnout now in presidential elections in the United States is very, very low compared to the 82% or so that we have in New Zealand. Now that's saying that I think that people feel disenfranchised. So based on our experience, and I think the experience of all those other jurisdictions around the world that have made a success under MMP, I'd really encourage Americans to have a look at it. I think it is something that could actually it actually makes politics more exciting, and a bit more excitement encourages people to get themselves involved, and I think democracy is a precious gift. I encourage everyone to vote, to get involved. If you want to make a difference, don't just sit around moaning about things, but actually get yourself involved. So a greater spread of parties, as I mentioned earlier, really encourages people to do that.
Let me just do a quick check. How much influence would you say that small parties like your new party and the Greens and ACT have in the MMP system? Would you say it's proportional to their actual numbers, or disproportional in some way, too small or too large?
It can be quite disproportional. You can end up holding the balance of power effectively, and from that position negotiating some major concessions from the party that's going to lead the government. And New Zealand has become quite innovative in putting those arrangements together under what we call confidence supply agreements, instead of actually being in coalition where the little party gets absorbed into the big party effectively, in exchange, of course, for some trade-offs in terms of policy. But the small party can maintain a measure of independence whilst having a written agreement with the larger party, making some important policy concessions. And I think, for example, what United Future has achieved in this present government is quite phenomenal. They got 2.67% of the vote, but they have actually driven through some major taxation and other reforms as a small party in the Parliament, because it just so happened that those three votes were very, very important to who was going to form the next government. There's another party here too called New Zealand First, a bigger party. They've actually got 7 MPs. Again, they also have achieved a great deal, because even more so, their 7 votes were very, very important and was actually the determinant of who was going to govern New Zealand. On other occasions where the party that forms the government has almost got the numbers and is just 2 or 3 short, and it's got three different parties you can go and talk to, your bargaining position is much less. So potentially, you know, it can be you can have a disproportionately large influence in the country, but that is tempered by the fact that the big party is not going to give away too much ground to you if it conflicts with their own policy positioning, because if they do that, they'll lose some of their support base. So it's a very interesting way in which governments are now put together under MMP, and you've got a variety of potentially different outcomes, just depending really on how the numbers fall.
I think that's all I had. Helen, did you have any questions?
I do have a couple of short questions.
Sure.
And I'll ask you to direct your answers to Brian.
Yeah, sure, yep.
One question is, what sort of, in terms of proportions, how much support do New Zealand religious parties have compared to the US?
That's a question, I think, which is yet to be answered. The history of Christian-based politics in New Zealand has been very messy. No party with a specific commitment to Christian values has actually made it into Parliament. But they've got very close to it. I think the key, as I mentioned earlier, to success is going to have something which is broad enough to encompass both Catholics and Protestants, Orthodox, all the other strains within Christianity, to bring those together, which I think our party's got the potential to do. So I think the jury's out on that. Now in America, where the number of Christians and the participation in church life is way, way, way higher than New Zealand, I think there's an enormous opportunity for a Judeo-Christian based party. Also, of course, you've got quite a large Jewish community. So put the two together, and I think under MMP, such a party could be a tremendous success.
Hmm. And you mentioned earlier that you'd made some notes that you wanted to talk about. Is there anything?
I think we've covered them all, actually.
Great. All right. Well,
pretty much. Although that last question you asked is a fascinating one, because, yeah, I mean, gosh, I think under MMP a party which could bring together Catholics and Protestants, so it would actually be what you'd call a moderate, broad-based Christian party. And by the way, there is a move in the States to do that. It's headed by a guy, I don't know his name, but he was a former US diplomat and a Catholic. And he is saying, look, the left-right divide, you know, that the Republican Christian support for the Republican Party goes along with a fairly right-wing economic agenda at the same as well, and the Christian support for the Democrats, vice versa. So, you know, majors on and then also you get an issue like abortion, which is divided between the two parties. And he's saying, a bit like I'm saying, look, if we were actually to be authentic to the Judeo-Christian tradition, we'd be doing both these things. So he's actually trying to build a consensus in America. I don't know how that's going to come be expressed politically, because you've only got a two-party system. But he is trying to build a consensus between Protestants and Catholics. Say, look, we've got an awful lot in common, but we need to find some common ground, some centre ground politically, and we could be really successful. So that's I'd say that's a very interesting development, and if it took off in the US, but you need even then you need MMP probably to make it successful, because people are still until you do that, people are just going to have to make a stark choice. You're either a Democrat or a Republican. But it's a very interesting area. And do you think Brian, there's any prospect of MMP catching on in the United States?
I honestly, my opinion is that I don't think that enough people in the United States know about MMP or STV, and that's one of the reasons why I'm making the movie in the first place.
Yes,
is to get the idea out there. Now, whether or not it's a good idea is, you know, up to the people, but I think it is, and it's worth looking into at least. There are definitely drawbacks, as there are with any system, but you know.
Yeah, there's pluses and minuses. On balance, I think it's brilliant. But I mean, I wouldn't be doing an interview with you if we were back in first past the post days. You'd only be talking to National and Labour. That would be it.
Yeah.
And yeah. So and the Maori Party is another, you know, very interesting thing in New Zealand, isn't it? You know, just to see them. They really should have figured it out in about 1995. You know, that under MMP they'd have a massive opportunity. I think it's possible, and next year they might sweep all the Maori seats. Maybe 6 out of 7 anyway. And so at 7 seats, they're probably going to have an influence on whichever government is elected long term.
Strong prospects for
they're going to need someone. There's going to be a number of occasions from time to time where their 7 seats are going to be the difference between governing or not.
That's actually kind of interesting. I read in the New Zealand Herald that there was a latest poll where the Greens had dropped their support precipitously in Auckland. And
yes.
That seems to me like way too large a drop in way too short a time for me. I'm thinking sampling error or polling error or something. But assuming it's true, it would give National enough votes to lead the country as a single party. What do you think about that possibility? No,
I don't. It won't happen. It won't happen. The last time that any political party, even under first past the post, won an absolute majority, more than 50% of the votes, was 1951. So even under first past the post in New Zealand, every government's had a minority, less than 50% of the vote. So it won't happen. Well, in my view, Brian, there's a fault in the polling system here. When we actually get into the election campaign, they have a category called "Don't Know" that comes into it, and that's normally about somewhere between 10 and 14% of the electorate who say, "I don't know." And then once the election campaign's over, all the polls forget about that category, and all they're doing is polling the people who've already made their mind up which party they're going to vote for. So when you factor the don't knows back into it, everybody drops down right across the board. So I think it gives a kind of a false picture. And John Key would understand that very, very well. He, National are not planning to get 50% of the vote. I mean, they'd love to, but it's highly unlikely that that would happen. And then, of course, when you get to I mean, the other wild card is that particularly with the don't knows, and this is probably how United Future got in 2002. Somebody during the election campaign says or does something which really catches on, as Peter Dunn did in what we call the worm debate in 2002, and suddenly a whole lot of the don't knows switch across to United Future, and we got 6.7% of the vote. So something like that will happen. It always does.
So it's way too.
And I agree with you about the Greens. I think the Greens have got a natural constituency which is slightly above the 5% threshold, probably about 6%. They'll pretty much stick there, I think, when push comes to shove. So it is a bit of a that particular poll, I think, is a bit of a rogue poll, really. Yeah.
Something that you just said reminded me. Got to take these off. It's awful hearing yourself echo. We haven't actually talked about any specific policies that a Judeo-Christian-based party would have. Are you able to sort of talk about maybe 3 policies, or? Sure.
I certainly could, because you're quite right. We haven't actually talked on our policies, but very strongly around family issues is where our policy position we're going is the thing. Yeah. So I could talk about that briefly, if you'd like.
Sure. We have the time if you do.
Okay. Well, let's say that I think that my new party's political positioning is going to be very, very strongly around family issues. We, for example, have some very negative statistics in this country in terms of the breakdown of the family. And I believe that we can turn that around if government gets involved in providing funding through vouchers or similar for marriage preparation courses, so that people prepare properly for marriage, and then once they're married, to have marriage enrichment courses, so that people can actually keep their marriages going and have a vital and good relationship long term as part of their marriage. And then again, around that whole educational thing, we need a lot more programs with government support around parenting. Prenatal, preschool, pre-teen, teenage years, right through, so that we actually break the cycle which I think exists in all countries, where dysfunctional families, or children that come from dysfunctional families, tend to become dysfunctional parents. So you have an intergenerational negative cycle going. And the only way to break that is through education, through giving people the knowledge and the skills that they can do better than that. Also, we will have what's called income splitting for taxation purposes, so that for a couple with dependent children, their total income will be split 50-50 for tax purposes. We have a progressive tax system, which would mean that for many families, particularly where there's just one income earner, their tax bill would go down significantly, and we believe that's fair. Not only from a point of view, because of course they've got to actually look after their own children, so their costs are much higher than, say, an equivalent single person. At the moment, a single person pays exactly the same amount of tax as a sole income earner who may be supporting a wife and 3 children, and I think that's quite unfair, because they obviously, their costs are much higher. But more importantly, you're also signalling that the partner in the marriage, normally the woman, who stays home to look after the children, particularly in those preschool years, is actually doing a very important work. I say it's the most important work human beings get to do. And it's important that society actually places a value on that, and not just regard it as work which is not actually contributing something to the economy. It's contributing massively both to our society and to our economy when you think it through logically, because children are our future. So those are the sorts of areas that we want to explore in depth, and I call it a fence at the top of the cliff approach. We've had successive governments having all kinds of programs which are trying to rescue people who have already fallen off the cliff in the first place. And we're saying, look, it's much more sensible to actually build some fence at the top of the cliff to give people the skills they need to really make sure that we have a stable environment in which children can grow up, and ideally one which is headed by mum and dad. All the evidence shows that's the best way in which children can be raised with the best outcomes in terms of health, education and income level, and by far and away the lowest involvement in the criminal justice system. Most of the people involved in the criminal justice system in New Zealand, if you track it back, it started in the family. Disproportionately high number of people who end up in jail come from dysfunctional families, often without either a mother or a father at home, often with just a mum at home. And that's particularly true actually amongst Maori in particular. So those, I think, are really deep issues that we need to get into as a society.
You have anything else?
No.
All right. Anything else you wanted to say around?
No, I think we've pretty much covered the bases.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Nice to meet you, Brian, and I trust that the rest of your stay here goes well and that you'll get some good,
hope so. Yeah.
some good footage. Yeah.
Thank you for that.